Good evening, I'm David Kramer with the National Weather Service. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. Get any updates to our forecast or any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And finally, at the bottom of the page, we do have our email address, and you can follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Taking a look now, we'll start off with some winter weather advisories that we have out for the southern part of the state. Out in the Susitna Valley for areas south of Talkeetna, we do have a winter weather advisory for freezing rain in effect, and that is going to start at midnight tonight and go through noon on Monday. Again, that is south of Talkeetna. Then down in the Bristol Bay area for areas north and west of King Salmon, so that does include Dillingham area. We do have a winter weather advisory out for snow and freezing rain for those locations, and that is out currently until 6 a.m. on Monday. Finally, as we move out to the Panhandle area in the very southern portions of the Panhandle, we do have a high wind warning out with wind gusts expected to be as high as 60 miles per hour, and that is going to be in effect from 6 p.m. this evening until 5 a.m. on Monday. That will include areas such as Craig, Ketchikan, Metlakatla, and other places in the very southern portions of the Panhandle. As we move up to the north, we have a winter weather advisory out along the Dalton Highway, and that is in areas of the upper Koyukuk Valley, and that is going to be in effect from 9 p.m. this evening until 10 a.m. on Monday, and that is for blowing snow, again, areas along the Dalton Highway in the upper Koyukuk Valley. And finally, along the far northwestern portions of the state, we do have a winter storm warning for snow and blowing snow, and this is going to primarily impact areas right around Point Hope, and that is going to be in effect from 9 a.m. on Monday until midnight Monday night. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery, we can start off with areas out over the Bering Sea. We can see that northerly flow bringing in some of those lower clouds indicated by those darker colors there on the satellite imagery, and that's going to bring in some areas of snow with that cold air from the north throughout areas of the Bering Sea, St. Paul, and Adak. And then as we look at this satellite imagery again, we can see a low pressure system that was south of Kodiak Island moving slowly to the west, and the frontal system with that pushing all the way along the coastline, bringing in a lot of precipitation to areas throughout the North Gulf Coast down into southeast Alaska as well. And finally, over the main part of the state, we do have some cloud cover moving in over those areas, bringing some areas of snow showers as different bands of precipitation move into the area. So we'll check out some of that here for the remainder of the day with that strong southerly flow and a lot of warm air coming up from the south in the eastern part of the Gulf of Alaska, bringing primarily rain to areas of the Panhandle, with some of those locations further to the north and a little bit further away from the Gulf seeing a mix of snow as well, especially at higher elevations. Along the North Gulf Coast, this front is also bringing in some rain to areas along the coastline, but as we get to more interior locations and higher elevations, we are expecting that to mix or change over to snow, with some of those areas pushing in that warmer air, transitioning the lower levels to some of the rain that started off as snow. Into the more interior locations, expecting that to be primarily snow. And then out for Southwest Alaska, kind of a similar story, some of that warm air pushing into areas around Lake Iliamna, down by King Salmon, expecting to primarily see rain, but as we get further to the north and west, we are expecting that to be snow or a mix of snow and freezing rain for those areas north and west of King Salmon. As we look up along the northeastern part of the interior, expecting to see some snow up there, and then fog along the Arctic coastline until we get out by that Point Hope area where we are expecting to see those blowing snow conditions. Down along the west coast, we are going to see a lot of snow showers just off the coastline for much of the Bering Sea, for the Pribilof Islands, and down through much of the Aleutian Islands until we get further to the east where it's going to be a little bit warmer, expecting rain showers out there. For tonight, going to see a continued story, a lot of northerly flow over the Bering and Aleutians, bringing a lot of snow showers from the north. A little bit warmer as we get further to the east, expecting that to transition to rain. But along the west coast, as this frontal band pushes further into the western part of the state, expecting to see a lot of snow from the Bristol Bay area through the YK Delta into the western parts of the interior, with some areas of blowing snow up there in the Bettles area along the Dalton Highway. And then as we get further to the northwest part of the state, some new snowfall and strong winds giving blowing snow conditions up there from that Point Hope area along the Arctic coastline. Down in the eastern part of the interior, not a lot of activity, but as we drop down into the eastern parts of the Alaska Range, expecting to see some snow down there and transition to rain as we get to the North Gulf Coast. And that's going to be true all the way along the North Gulf Coast, with areas further inland, higher elevations, expecting to see some more snow mixed in with that rain. As we move into Monday, continuing to see flow around this low pressure system, bringing that southerly flow throughout much of the Gulf. A lot of rain for the southeast part of the state along the North Gulf Coast. And then again, as we move further inland, higher elevations, expecting to see more snow. Copper River Basin should remain cold enough for snow out there. As we move into the interior, a lot of lighter snowfall throughout all portions of the interior, moving up into the Brooks Range and along the Arctic coastline as well. However, along the Arctic coast should be windy enough to see some areas of blowing snow up there. Moving down the coastline, we are going to still see some areas of blowing snow along that Point Hope area, where we will have more snow in the Kotzebue Sound, Seward Peninsula, and Norton Sound areas. Northerly flow throughout that area from the Bering Strait down into the Bering Sea. We are going to have a lot of snow showers out there in that central and eastern portions, although we will have some weak ridging out over the western Aleutians, inhibiting some of that snowfall. But we do have another system approaching from the west, bringing more snow with another front coming in. And as we look into Tuesday, that system will have pushed off to the north, but there will be some lingering snow showers over the western Aleutians on Tuesday. Another weak low will have formed over the Aleutian Islands, bringing some rain to the area. And as we move out further along the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula, northwest flow bringing in more snow showers to areas along the coast, down into the Alaska Peninsula, especially on the Bering side of that flow. Low pressure near Kodiak Island and the Barrens will bring some rain throughout much of the North Gulf Coast, similar to what we'll have seen today and into Monday, where we will have more areas in the mountains and a little bit further inland now, seeing that transition to snow. And then down in southeast Alaska, primarily rain. Some areas up by Haines Skagway may be cold enough to stick around with some snow on Tuesday. Much of the central and eastern part of the interior shouldn't see much activity, but along the Arctic coastline, expecting to see some snow up there, and then some snow along much of the west coast, with some areas of blowing snow still lingering around the Point Hope area even on Tuesday. Taking a look at our temperatures, Monday morning low temps starting off in the southeastern part of the state, dropping down into the lower to mid 40s, with the warmest conditions furthest to the south, dropping down to 44 or 45 degrees in the southern locations. Along the North Gulf Coast, temperatures dropping around 40 degrees there, with Cordova only getting down to 41 degrees Monday night. Staying above freezing for much of South Central, with the exception of the Glen Allen area, dropping down into the teens, around 19 degrees low there. Single digits for much of the interior, and colder as we get further to the north, with Arctic Village down to -5 degrees, and then all below zero along the Arctic coastline. As we get further off to the west around the Kotzebue Sound area, shouldn't drop below zero, but stay well below freezing there. Single digits for much of the area on the Norton Sound side as well. However, St. Lawrence Island going to stay a little bit warmer there, 36 degrees. Down into the teens for much of the YK Delta, mid-20s for the Bristol Bay area, and into the 30s for many locations in the Aleutians, colder as we get further to the west. Then Monday afternoon high is going to go into the mid-30s for the Aleutian Islands, up around 40 degrees for the Bristol Bay area, but staying in the 20s for much of the YK Delta and Norton Sound locations. As we move up further to the north, getting into the single digits for some locations along the Arctic coastline, but we will have some places staying a little bit below zero there. As we move down into the interior, we are going to see places getting up into the 20s, with some places such as Fort Yukon staying a little bit more sheltered in the valley there, going to only get up to around 10 degrees. Fairbanks getting up to 23 degrees, and then as we drop down into the south central portion of the state, temperatures well above freezing for most locations, with the exception again of Glen Allen area and the Copper River Basin, only getting up to around 26 for a high on Monday afternoon. Then as we look down into the southeastern part of the state, temperatures getting up into the mid-40s. Tuesday morning going to drop down into the upper 30s for most locations in southeast Alaska. Down just below freezing for many places in south central, except along the coast, going to stay warmer there. In the teens throughout the interior, and in the single digits to below zero along the Arctic coastline. Temperatures down around the Norton Sound area going to stay in the teens, as well as the YK Delta, dropping just below freezing in the Bristol Bay area. Mid-30s for the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, and right around freezing for the western Aleutians. And finally, on Tuesday afternoon, temperatures rising to just below 40 degrees for the Aleutian Islands, staying in the 30s for the Bristol Bay area, lower 20s for the YK Delta area, Norton Sound area as well. Kotzebue Sound area dropping down, or only getting up into the teens, and then in the single digits along the North Gulf Coast, or North Arctic coast rather, and then in the teens in the interior. We'll be back shortly with the aviation section.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For our aviation segment, we'll start off with a quick look at our flying weather. Over the Bering Sea, we can see we have widespread MVFR conditions, but as we get closer to the southwest coastline, we do have some IFR conditions mixed in from the Bristol Bay area, Alaska Peninsula, up into the Norton Sound area, and then along the coastline as we get closer towards the Kotzebue Sound area. Up along the Arctic coastline, some areas of IFR conditions expected, especially in the more interior parts of the Arctic coast. And then as we drop down into the interior part of the state, clearing up a little bit, some VFR conditions expected there. And then MVFR and IFR throughout the North Gulf Coast, much of south central Alaska, and down in the Panhandle. Then on Monday afternoon, clearing up somewhat, a little bit more MVFR conditions in the Panhandle area, but still some IFR conditions, especially along the North Gulf Coast, and MVFR and IFR conditions in much of the mountain ranges as well as we get into south central Alaska. As we get up towards the Brooks Range and areas a little bit to the south of that in the northern part of the interior, IFR and MVFR conditions expected there. That will extend up into the Arctic coastline as well. And then down the entire west coast of the state, we are expecting IFR conditions for Monday afternoon. Out over much of the Bering Sea, MVFR conditions expected, and that does include the Aleutian Islands. Then moving us into Tuesday morning, going to continue to see MVFR conditions throughout the Bering and Aleutians, and then some IFR conditions mixing in as we get into southwest part of the state. Along the coastline, however, should stay more marginal, and those IFR conditions a little bit more further inland. As we move up the Arctic coastline through the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound area, expecting to see a lot more of those IFR conditions, and that is going to be true as well along the Arctic coastline. As we get into the Brooks Range and northern parts of the interior, expecting to see more IFR conditions, but diminishing down to MVFR conditions as we get further south in the interior. Down in south central Alaska, you're going to see a lot of IFR conditions, still primarily in the higher elevations in the mountains and along those coastal ranges. Then as we drop down into the Panhandle area, primarily MVFR conditions expected for Tuesday morning. Moving into Tuesday afternoon, expecting to see widespread MVFR conditions for the Panhandle area, with some places a little bit further to the north and west expecting to see some IFR conditions. MVFR and IFR for south central Alaska, along the Brooks Range and up along the Arctic coastline Tuesday afternoon. As we move down the west coast of the state, expecting to see widespread IFR conditions down into parts of the YK Delta, clearing up to mostly marginal VFR as we move into the Bristol Bay area, and then widespread MVFR for the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at the pass flying now. With all those IFR conditions, it's no surprise that many of these will also be IFR. AKwx going to start us off with IFR conditions as well as Adigan Pass. For the Alaska Range, starting down there by Lake Clark and Merrill, expecting to see IFR conditions for Monday, as well as Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, and Isabel Pass, all expecting to see IFR conditions. However, as we get a little bit further to the east, Mentasta Pass should be VFR for Monday. Dropping down to Tanita Pass, IFR conditions improving to MVFR conditions in the afternoon, but Portage will stay IFR throughout the day. And then down in the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White both expected to be IFR for the day on Monday. Freezing levels, we do have our 4,000 foot freezing level moving through the Panhandle area and along the North Gulf Coast, with some of those 4,000 and 2,000 foot levels moving up into the interior of the state, and our service freezing line moving through the Bering Sea and out towards the western Aleutians. As we look now at our icing, we do have above 2,000 feet for the central Aleutian Islands, above 3,000 feet over much of the west coast of the state, and dropping to above 2,000 feet along the Arctic coastline, increasing with height as we get down towards the south central, where we will see freezing levels above 4,000, or icing levels above 4,000 feet and above 4,000 for the Panhandle. For our jet stream, the main part of the jet going to stay further to the south out of a westerly direction, 160 knots there, but out over the state easterly 65, moving through much of the state and out of the northern portion out of a westerly direction, 80 knots there. Dropping down to 9,000 feet southerly flow for the Panhandle, 30 to 40 knots there, dropping down to 25 to 35 out over the state. Out over the Bering Sea northerly flow, 25 to 35 knots there, diminishing to 25 to 30 as we get for the central Aleutian Islands. down to 3,000 feet. Still northerly flow, 20 to 25 knots for the most part, increasing as we get further to the east in the eastern part of the Bering Sea, 30 to 45 knots out of that northwesterly direction at 3,000 feet. And then out over mainland Alaska, 20 to 30 knots out of a southerly direction, increasing as we get further to the north, 30 to 45 or 40 knots out of an easterly direction along the Arctic coastline, and then out over the Panhandle, 10 to 25 knots, strongest as we get closer towards the Gulf. And as we look at our turbulence for the Panhandle area, below 5,000 feet expected there, and then along the North Gulf Coast below 4,000 feet. Out over the West Coast areas below 3,000 feet around Kotzebue, Norton Sound areas and St. Lawrence Island, and then below 4,000 feet for the Panhandle.
It's kind of hard to explain how important weather is to our job. I mean, it really affects everything we do.
In 2018, NOAA launches the GOES-S satellite, which takes its place in orbit as GOES-17. Working together with GOES-16, the two new geostationary weather satellites will provide constant watch over the United States and the Western Hemisphere, from the west coast of Africa all the way to New Zealand, helping monitor severe storms, wildfires, and daily weather patterns. Since its launch, NOAA's GOES-16 satellite has already demonstrated its critical capability for keeping our nation weather ready. Throughout the active 2017 hurricane season, GOES-16 delivered imagery with detail and clarity never achieved before, with 4 times greater resolution than previous NOAA satellites, and delivered this imagery faster than ever before, helping forecasters predict the path of a storm and where and when it will intensify. These accurate and timely forecasts allowed for emergency managers to prepare for evacuations, map flood areas, and save lives.
So the weather matters. The weather matters before the weather happens, and the weather matters after the event happens, because what we're able to do to prepare, allocate resources, provide information to the public through the media beforehand, and what we're able to do afterwards, how and when the waters are going to recede, so we know we can get vehicles with life-saving food and shelter equipment down a particular highway. All of that depends on the forecast.
In the GOES West position, GOES-17 will be able to provide critical data for the westernmost United States, Alaska, and Hawaii.
We're talking about getting data updates in just seconds, so we can quickly spot wildfires and closely monitor the wind direction and their intensity. The crispness of the data coming in at a faster rate will also help with fog forecasts. We can see the moment the stratus starts to develop or when it starts to move out.
Like GOES-16, GOES-17 carries a suite of advanced instruments, including tools for sophisticated earth sensing, lightning detecting, solar imaging, and space weather monitoring. As an equal partner in the sky, GOES-17 will expand coverage of the advanced baseline imager technology across the Pacific Ocean, allowing meteorologists and local officials to see severe weather systems developing in real time.
So instead of seeing something, say, this large, that as you zoom in actually gets kind of blurry, you're actually going to see something that is much more detailed.
In its GOES West position, GOES-17 will be able to monitor conditions in the western U.S. like wildfires, coastal fog, and atmospheric rivers when storms from the Pacific dump heavy rain and snow over the western U.S. GOES-17 will have a major impact on fighting wildfires in California. Up-to-the-minute information and crisp detail allows forecasters to spot fires faster than ever before, even before the first 911 calls come in, and to better track and predict the path of large, dynamic, and dangerous fires.
It's amazing to see what we can get and at the level of detail and the speed that we can get the information down into the ground that makes our decision-making way more accurate.
With a view of the Pacific Ocean, GOES-17 will also provide a critical eye over shipping lanes vital to the U.S. economy, protecting cargo and passenger vessels from dangerous ocean storms. GOES-17 will also provide a high-definition view over Alaska, resulting in better weather forecasts and improved monitoring of sea ice, wildfires, and volcanic ash. The advanced baseline imager on GOES-17 can distinguish between clouds, sea ice, and snow cover, a critical need during Alaska's dark, cloudy winter months. GOES 17's geostationary lightning mapper monitors lightning flashes, including the in-cloud lightning most prevalent in severe storms, helping forecasters determine when a storm is forming, intensifying, and becoming more dangerous. Thanks to GOES 17, emergency managers will be equipped with more accurate weather predictions and faster warnings, providing a real impact, saving lives, and protecting infrastructure. Watching over Earth from 22,300 miles above, GOES S will provide vital data to our weather-ready nation.
Hi, I'm JPSS. I'm a high-tech weather satellite that orbits our planet. I do something called a polar orbit. I circle the Earth from North Pole to South Pole, over and over, while the Earth spins. While I do that, I get lots of information about what's going on around the globe. I watch storms, clouds, and rain. I take the temperature of the ocean, measure air quality, ozone health, and take pictures of the land and sea. This information is used for all kinds of things. It helps us take care of our coasts and oceans and all the amazing things that live there. It helps us monitor harmful weather events like floods and droughts and measure the health of the environment. Most importantly, it helps us predict weather 3 to 7 days in the future. That means I can be a big help ahead of storms, where future warnings are important. I send information to the National Weather Service. They use the information to create forecasts. The forecasts are shared with people all over the country to help prepare for weather emergencies. So you look to the sky and wave. I'll be flying by.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine segment. We'll take a quick look at our ice edge, which does extend all the way along the Arctic coast and down many of the locations along the west coast into the Kuskokwim Delta area. We do have some growth along the shorefast ice on the northwest part of the state, and we do have growth moving out to a southwesterly direction that should continue as we have that northeasterly wind flow over the area. Then as we look at our marine forecast, starting off in the southeastern part of the state, we have winds out of a south to southeast direction in the inside waters, gusting up as high as 40 knots. Out in the Gulf of Alaska, we have southerly flow 35 knots, but as we get further to the north, storm force winds 50 knots out of an easterly direction with seas as high as 17 feet. Then on Tuesday, we do have flow dropping off quite a bit with south to southeast flow from many areas in southern locations, 15 to 20 knots, seas out in the Gulf up to as high as 14 feet. As we move up further to the north in the inside waters, switching around northwesterly flow around 15 knots there, and then 20 to 25 knots as we get further north in the Gulf out of a southeasterly direction. For Monday in the south central area, and along the North Gulf Coast, we have winds anywhere from 20 to 30 knots for most locations. However, as we get further off to the east, a little bit stronger there, just under storm force winds at 45 knots with seas as high as 18 feet. Prince William Sound easterly flow 20 knots there, and then in the Cook Inlet area, 20 to 25 knots, strongest as we get closer towards the Barren Islands. On Tuesday, flow still out of a north to northeast direction for the Cook Inlet area, 25 to 30 knots there. Easterly flow in the northern part of the Gulf around 25 knots and 25 knots out of a southeasterly direction in Prince William Sound. For the Alaska Peninsula and areas around Kodiak Island, as you get further off to the east, easterly flow 25 to 30 knots with seas as high as 15 feet, strongest as we get further into the Gulf. And as we look for the Panhandle area or the Alaska Peninsula area, northwesterly flow 25 to 35 knots, strongest on the southern side of the peninsula, especially with those gusty winds going through the gaps. As we look into Tuesday, northwesterly flow staying out over the western locations, 25 to 30 knots there. Then out by Kodiak Island, westerly flow 30 to 35 knots, strongest further off to the east. For the Aleutian Islands, northwesterly flow 25 to 30 knots for most locations, stronger south of the eastern Aleutians, 35 knots there. Seas as high as 14 feet, strongest or highest on the Bering side. Out for the western Aleutian Islands, somewhat of a westerly flow, 20 to 25 knots out there on Monday. Then on Tuesday, northerly winds around 25 knots out over western locations. And as we move out to the east, transitioning to somewhat of a northwesterly wind direction, 20 to 25 knots out there. Along the west coast, we do have primarily northerly flow for most locations, 25 to 30 knots. Seas as high as 13 feet, highest up by St. Lawrence Island and out by St. Matthew Island. Then on Tuesday, flow switching a little bit to be a little bit more westerly, 25 to 30 knots for most locations. Weaker up in the Norton Sound area, almost a variable wind around 10 knots there. As we move up along the west coast of the state, we do have northerly flow, 35 to 40 knots, and then along the Arctic coastline, east to northeast flow around 30 knots there. So we look into Tuesday, along the coastline, winds dropping off to some degree, 20 to 30 knots, still out of that northeasterly direction, and then along the Arctic coastline, 25 to 30 knots there around that northeasterly direction as well. So our weather for tonight, we are looking at northerly flow out over the Bering Sea with some snow showers expected. That should impact the central and western Aleutian Islands as well. However, as we move off further to the east, expecting that to be a little bit warmer. Should probably see some more rain out there. As our frontal system pushes through the western part of the state, expecting to see quite a bit of snow for areas around the northern part of the Bristol Bay Area, up through areas into the Norton Sound area and western parts of the interior. With areas out by the Dalton Highway near the Bettles area in the upper Koyukuk Valley, we are expecting to see some advisory conditions out there, and those should be valid from 9 p.m. today until around 10 a.m. on Monday. So look out over the west coast of the state. We do have a winter storm warning out for locations near the Point Hope area, and that is going to be in effect from 9 a.m. Monday until midnight on Monday for some blowing snow in that area. Along the Arctic coastline, we'll see some areas of snow and blowing snow as well. And then as we drop down into the south central part of the state, we're going to see some rain along the coastline, and that's going to be transitioning to snow as we get further to interior locations. However, a little bit trickier in the southern part of the Susitna Valley, where we will have some areas of freezing rain possible south of Talkeetna, and that will be valid from midnight tonight until noon on Monday. And then down in the southeastern part of the state, we will have an area with some higher winds in the very southern portions of the state, so look out for speeds up to as high as 60 miles per hour. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.